Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Chair, I thank the Minister's contribution, and he talked about ambition, and he talked about the National Party's commitment to being, I think as the election slogan was back in 2008, being ambitious for New Zealand. I have to say to the Minister, it is hard for people to be ambitious about their own circumstances when real disposable income for people is decreasing. And if you look out in the communities, how do communities benchmark their take, if you will, excuse me, their take on whether an economy is thriving for them? And it's pretty simple. It's not loaded with economic terms and analysis for your average Kiwi battler out there, or your average family. It's about whether that family and the breadwinners within that family feel that they're getting ahead economically, whether they feel they're getting a fair go, whether they're feeling they can get ahead, just not make ends meet, but actually have a little bit of their own surplus in their own domestic economy for the extras in life, perhaps for their family, whether it's getting financially tougher for them. That's how your average Kiwi, I would argue, would measure and benchmark the progress of an economy, and therefore the progress and quality of the economic stewardship of a government. So if you have a look at some of the statistics that have been produced independently and by the government's own agencies, you're looking at, of course, per capita growth being flat. The only real growth really is off the back of, one, the earthquake, and two, population growth. If you look at exports as a percentage of GDP, with a government target that was trumpeted all around the country, that their exports as a percentage of GDP target was 40%. It started at 30, it's now 27 to 28% and going backwards. As another sort of benchmark or acid test for an economy, if you look at per capita GDP last year, 0.03%. 0.03%, sir. As I said, real disposable income heading south. And then the Minister talked about the wafer-thin surplus of $400 million. What he failed to mention, of course, is if you look at the EQC papers, you will see that the $400 million so-called surplus is exactly the amount that EQC didn't spend last year in Canterbury. So, you could argue, well, are the people of Canterbury and my province getting as fair a go as they should? Are they benchmarking the quality of management of this economy based on that? $400 million surplus, exactly the same amount that EQC did not spend last year. That's the fact. So in terms of being ambitious for New Zealanders, I think we would all agree, cross-party, that we would like to see Kiwis get ahead, that we want to see their ambitions achieved. Whether they live in the poorest of our communities or they live in the entrepreneurial side of the road, if you will, and have a bit extra to invest in business, to employ people, we want to see Kiwis get ahead. We want them to do better than simply stretching their budget to the point of breaking point to get the kids' school shoes, to get a feed on the table. If that's as good as it gets for people, then that is not particularly ambitious, I would argue. And this, of course, which the Finance Minister sort of parks in the back in the archive, this is, of course, from an incoming national government that inherited 9 long years of surplus. Every year, a Labor government put a budget together, there was a surplus, and not just an offset with, Rob Peter to pay Paul, a real one that grew every year. And well, indeed, that they showed their confidence in the financial stewardship of Sir Michael Cullen by appointing him to the only, Kiwi-owned bank that we have, that is Kiwi Bank. And I can go, Mr Muller's, he's nodding, and he knows that's the truth. And of course, that was a finance minister, of course, that delivered to the national government, to deliver to Bill English, 0 Crown debt. 0. Not 1%, 0 Crown debt. 0 Crown debt. So they inherited surplus, they inherited 0 Crown debt, and that would, I would argue, would have provided quite a decent platform for a government that was ambitious about our local communities and our Kiwis and wanted to get people doing better than just trying to string it together to make ends meet. Yet that, I'd argue, that legacy has been squandered. Now, you can say GFC, and I'm sure the Minister would, and to be fair to him, there is a component of that. But we're through that, and this government has had options. And God only knows, sir, had they inherited a budget of, Mr Chair,
the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Chair, had they inherited a budget from Labor in 2008 of huge debt, of huge deficit, then goodness knows how they would have coped through that GFC. And I note that the Minister was honest enough many, many years ago to say, hey, you know, this is the rainy day, and acknowledge the fact that Michael Cullen and others had set up a situation, a platform of zero crown debt and 9 years of surpluses so that we could tough it out when the GFC was put upon us through overseas influence. So I'd be interested in the Minister's comments on those statistics. Per capita growth flat, exports, particularly exports as a percentage of GDP, nowhere near the ambitious target that they set. Started at 30%, aimed for 40%, now it's 27 to 28% and winding back. And that was before the dairy crisis, by the way. That was before the dairy crisis. So I'd be interested in the Minister's comments in terms of the rationale and the plan and why that went awry. Or if there is a strategy going forward, given the dairy crisis and other issues internationally, what the strategy is to increase exports as a percentage of GDP to anywhere like that target of 40%. Likewise, real disposable income. I'd be interested in the Minister talking to us about how he proposes to increase, or what the plan is, the government plan, to move to see that reverse from decreasing to increasing. Likewise, I'd be interested in his comment. I'm sure there's one that is well rehearsed within the propaganda of the Beehive as to how he justifies a surplus that he calls as a real surplus of 400 mil with an EQC offset of unspent monies or spending they didn't make of an equivalent amount, sir. So, as I said, sir, we all agree, I think, cross-party, the Greens, the National Party, I think we all come into this place wanting to be ambitious for New Zealanders, wanting to do our best. We do disagree around the edges, I think, as to how we should get there. But I come back to my original point. Mum and Dad on Struggle Street, Minister, through you, sir, aren't going to sit there and read these weighty financial statements. They're not going to pick through them line by line. They're probably not as a priority concerned with analysis of Treasury, the Inland Revenue and independent economists. They'll sit there at home on a Thursday after they get the pay coming in and say, okay, how do we make our household economy, our household expenditure, how do we actually get through the next fortnight? That's how they'll judge it. And they'll say, is it easier for us? Is it harder for us? And for many, many people in New Zealand, it is a hard week to week, fortnight to fortnight, paycheck to paycheck war of attrition to get ahead. And Kiwis want to get ahead. And that's how they measure their ambition and how they achieve those ambitions through their week-to-week economies. You know, I forget, was it Muldoon or somebody said, you know, I think it might have been, you know, a couple of ministers over there, that people wouldn't understand the economy if they fell over it. People really do understand economies because they have to take money coming in and money going out and somehow make it balance, and they don't do it through a budget once a year, they do it every fortnight or every time they get their paychecks. So I'd be interested in the Minister's comments on that as we move through this debate, sir.
Mr. Chair.